So again, I guess I'll apologize that we ran into the trouble we ran into, and that I know many of us came. I know I tried to get extra sleep last night, knowing what was going to confront us today, and I'm sure many of you did too. So I'm sorry that we couldn't bring that to an end, but I do think that it was the right thing to do, to slow down until we can validate that the non-disclosures were not material, and I think that's really what the question is were those non-disclosures something that materially changes what comes out of that task force? And if the answer is no, then we can move forward and answer the question next.
Could I ask a dumb question regarding the chronic pain recommendations? And I've been on the commission for a year, and I have not been involved with this, but I really believe that there's no sense having the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I guess I don't understand. I mean, the opioid crisis is not a patient-induced crisis. It's a medical system-induced crisis from drug companies and physicians prescribing behaviors. And the dumb question I have is it not possible to have a two-tiered approach? Patients who have been on chronic opioids for 4 years and have done well, why can't we just grandfather them in and have a physician letter of recommendation that they can stay higher than 90 morphine units, and that we focus upon the new patients coming in being under more stringent guidelines? The patients that have been habitually on opiates are a self-limited population that will be decreasing and diminished between 5 and 30 years because of their chronic health problems. So the question is, why not have a two-tiered system, grandfather patients in, get the medical documentation if needed, and focus upon the new starts?
Yeah.
And that's the question.
Well, so we have the freedom to do anything we want with the task force recommendations. Their task was to try and take a complicated thing. Should we cover new things that aren't covered today to make it easier to take better care of these folks and perhaps reduce costs? And if so, what are those new things, and do they have evidence to support them? And then tangled up in all of that was, what should we do about the narcotic use that is occurring today, and what should we do about tomorrow's new chronic pain patient? And so they made recommendations. We can choose to adhere to them. We could choose to just throw the whole thing out and do absolutely nothing, or we could choose to just remold the whole thing. And so the VBBS work would largely be to try and address the question: is there a smarter way to implement some of this than what was given to us by the Chronic Pain Task Force? And so our mission would be to determine if the answer is yes. Well, first to determine if the evidence they're presenting us is sufficient enough to allow new things to be covered that aren't covered today. And if so, then how do we do that? And then what do we do about the narcotic? We could remain silent on the narcotic question.
But has the question been asked about just having a two-tiered approach?
No, I don't know that. Well, we have not actually wrestled with it. I don't know to the extent to which the Chronic Pain Task Force wrestled with it. I think the problem has been that in an effort to not let this very complicated topic overwhelm us at any of these other meetings, we kept saying, we're just going to do this in one big, huge sit-down next time. And the next time was supposed to be today, where we would have done the sausage making in the morning and then presented you hopefully a nice cooked sausage at the end of the day. Well, we didn't do the sausage making yet, and now we're running into a deadline. So the answer is, our group has not really discussed that, but I think that it's a totally valid question. Is there a two-tiered, well, what are the consequences of doing that versus doing what the task force said versus doing nothing? Those are all on the table. We have the freedom to do anything we want.
Well, I guess my impression is that there's been so much complicated data and recommendations put together that to undo that sausage without asking that question is a pretty difficult thing to do. And like I say, I have not been involved in it. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah.
So just to take a couple steps back, the back pain task force did wrestle with quite a bit with the legacy problem. They felt that the evidence of harm outweighed the evidence of benefit, and that they put the taper in so that there wouldn't be a sudden cutoff of those patients who technically weren't getting opioids covered because it was an uncovered condition. So they did wrestle with that a little bit. And then you didn't get a chance, unfortunately, today to really look at the meat of the proposal. Currently, these conditions that we're looking at aren't covered, so theoretically these patients are not getting opioids. So I know there's been a lot of, you heard it today, unfortunately, with a lot of the folks. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about our actual proposal. Our proposal is to allow coverage of opioids under certain conditions for 4 of those 5 chronic pain diagnoses. So I think there's been some wrestling with this already. The initial proposal didn't have that, and it's been modified at our previous meetings, both of the task force and at this task force. So hopefully in our April or May meeting, we'll get to really look at the meat of kind of really what's there, and hopefully we can work with the OHA communications folks to really try. I know they've done a really good job, but trying some more to our system's pretty arcane, and the prioritized list is pretty arcane, and there just seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about what we're really trying to do, trying to make sure the public gets the best information about what the proposal really is. And then obviously if you want to change any bit of it, or if you don't agree with anything, that's definitely your prerogative.
All right. So I before we wrap up, I did want to check with those HERC members that weren't at the BBBS today to see if by chance you have your calendars with you to check on the possibility of that April 25th date, because we're getting very good responses so far to that date as a possibility, and so we can't set it in stone today, but maybe get a very good sense of whether that date is looking good for others as well. So Linnea,
is that a Thursday?
That's a Thursday, April 25th.
I can make it.
Looks good for Linnea.
I'll be out of the country.
Yeah. So Leda's out of the country, and Mike, do you happen to know?
I
Probably, yeah. So initial sense is that looks like actually quite a good day, and so I think we'll probably get an email out to you here tomorrow to try to confirm that officially with everybody to get thumbs up or thumbs down on that. I've actually got Daphne already working to see if there's availability at our Wilsonville location to get the meeting. It's that's 5-6 weeks from now, so it's certainly not as much notice as we usually give them, and I unfortunately think the chances are 50-50 at best, but we'll see if we get lucky if that date's looking good.
Thanks. I just want to maybe finish by saying that how tricky this conflict of interest thing is, and how those of us who do this, who agree to do this kind of work, it's hard for us to know when conflict of interest might exist and when it doesn't. And I think that it's easy to have an honest omission because you didn't think it was pertinent. I was mentioning to somebody earlier on the issue last week, we took up around this so-called Impella. We had people, cardiac surgeons from Providence, who were testifying how important it was. I never disclosed that I work for Providence, too. At least I don't think I officially did. I didn't vote, but I didn't recuse myself from the discussion either. Afterwards, I wondered if that was a smart thing. And then when I got emails the next day from some of those people at Providence saying, thanks for your help and support, I was like, uh-oh. Then I got other emails from people inside of Providence said, you should have said no to that. That was a mistake. We didn't like that this didn't get stopped. And so I think it shows that even within our own organizations, it's hard to know where we stand and what's helpful and what's harmful. And when you're doing research on a topic, is that really a conflict or not? I don't know, but it's easy to fall into that space and not know it. And so I just want to call out the fact that, Kat, that's a hard thing. And I know it's not easy to be in the middle of all this, but.
Well, honestly, any of us could be.
Right.
I mean, and they've been calling me out in their blogs and things by name because I sit on all 3 task forces. Mm-hmm. Of course, they don't understand who I am or what I do or what degree I have.
Right.
It changes from blog to blog. But And it's disconcerting. I mean, it's disconcerting to me. I mean, I didn't know what today was going to look like. And, you know, I wondered, did I need to bring my husband with me to walk with me? I mean, I didn't know what to expect based on the amount of hysteria that seems to have been stirred up in their misunderstanding.
Well, it's easy to misunderstand what we do. I shared with our state society I had to present about what we do. So I gave an hour-long talk, and at the end they said, I think I get it, but they were still pretty confused about how some of this works. So here's people that are in the work, in the business, and these are most of the business-focused oncology people, and even they still didn't understand after now. So either I'm a really bad communicator or this is really complex stuff. And, you know, for these folks that are just very vulnerable to kind of plug in and understand all these things.
Just really, at this point, you know, we aren't weaning all the people off of opioids. The only thing we have done was with Guideline Note 56, which we've been using for 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah. We shined a light on it.
Almost 3 years.
We've been using it for 3 years, and it was based off what we all thought was good evidence when we agreed and passed it, that opioids cause harm to that specific patient population. And so most of the CCOs in the state and most of the Oregon Health Plan patients have been weaned off, or at least we are no longer paying for them. What happens, you know, if they're paying cash or...
That's actually a really important point. This is not a state mandate. Like, it's not a law. The legislature's not passing it. It's a insurance coverage.
It's an insurance
but it has,
coverage
which has implications, of course.
For a Medicaid population. That's,
it's important to me that you understand.
No, I do understand. My sister lives in Ohio and is a chronic back pain patient. And in Ohio, her neurosurgery clinic that she goes to said, we are cutting off pain management and you have 60 days to find a new provider. Within the Providence Medical Clinic that I am in, it is discussed about cutting and forced tapering. So it's nice to say that we're working within the guidelines. But my impression errs more with these folks from what I see within my professional life and career. It's just what it is.
Yeah. So go. I'm sorry, we have some on the phone too. Don't want to forget about you guys. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah. So a couple of things about the conflict of interest. The thing that's a little distressing to me is, you know, I think there's a overt conflict of interest when you're there to financially profit from something that you're testifying for. I think that is the original intention. But everybody has some sort of conflict of interest because you cannot escape your biases. And what is a little disturbing to me is, I understand trying to be completely transparent, but having looked at some of the evidence that is being put forth in support and some of the people that are testifying and applying information, the conflict of interest that they have is not being revealed. And so, you know, rather than I just want to make sure that we're aware that there are some heavily conflicted opinions out there that are not really based on what the evidence shows. And what I understood with the HERC is we're supposed to be able to, as best we can, as humans, to step away from the biases, to look at the available evidence that is out there so that we can evaluate that. And I'm hearing a lot of anecdotes that's being put forth as evidence, and a lot of evidence is being said, well, that's not really evidence because it's not what I believe to be evidence. So that's a little distressing. The second part is when we were in the chronic pain task force, one of the key things that some of us were trying to push for was pain education, and that is the one thing that continues to get skipped. There's at least 20 years of up-to-date pain science that people aren't understanding and they're not learning. And when we start seeing how that stuff works, it changes not only how you are approaching or treating or managing pain, but it actually can have significant impact on who you're working with. And when you understand the science of how, people forget, where do opioids work? They work in your brain on natural endogenous receptors. Those same receptors are highly active in states like chronic pain, anxiety, depression. And when you look at the physiology there, which I've not seen anybody publish about, at least on the supporting side, actually mention that physiology, there's some significant risks with long-term chronic opioid therapy on something that has already been compromised based on other factors. And so I just want to, it's a very difficult conversation, but there is research, there is evidence, and we have to actually be looking at the science.
Great, thank you. Dana.
This is Dana. I just want to follow up on several comments that were being made. The purpose of why OHA had asked BBBS and HERC to pause was because there are clear state policies and agency policies about conflict of interest and when it must be disclosed, and that's related to a financial conflict. I am not talking about general bias. I am not saying that potential conflict of interest might exist. That doesn't mean that you can't proceed in a discussion or a decision as long as that is shared publicly. When we've determined at very last minute that that disclosure had not happened and you are facing with a decision at that point, that is why we are asking to table it. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to proceed in this. It just means that we need to look back. When disclosure hasn't been given properly, we need to make sure that that didn't pose a conflict with the proposal that you're seeing. So I want to be clear, this is not talking about bias. It doesn't mean that many of you might have potential conflict of interest. We can help you with training where you need to make sure you're disclosing that as a public official on this HERC commission. But there is a difference between bias and conflict of interest according to state law and agency, and I want to make that really clear.
Great. Go ahead, Leda.
My comment has to do with the communication, I think, and you made a point about that we have to be very clear on this, and I hope that the agency is also helping us to really communicate those messages to the general population and to physicians and all of us, because it's so important. I mean, the testimony today was, that's personal, that's very, very personal, but I think that communication and that very clear, this is our past, this is what we're looking into, is so important to kind of hopefully diminish some of that.
I think the unfortunate culture that we're in is one where we take complex things in America and we dumb them down to a soundbite, and in stuff like this, it doesn't serve us well, and so we're always fighting that as well. Yeah, Linnea.
I just want to say, actually, Dana, I think we appreciate OHA's caution because I think we don't want to end up being less credible as a decision-making organization or group. And so I think all of us know that people, I don't know about you, my LinkedIn, number of touches, I get an email. It's like people have been looking at everything and people have been scouring for these things. And we know that happens when people have a passionate belief about something and want to look at that rather than the topic. But I appreciate the caution that you and Mr. Allen exhibited today, because I think it gives us greater credibility when we move forward in this work, and that I don't think any of us are reactive to, oh, we should have done it today. I think all of us went, oh, okay. At least that was my sense. I wasn't here this morning, but my sense was there was a, okay, pivot. I mean, this is what we need to do to maintain credibility as the decision-making group around health evidence. So I don't think there's any concern for us, and I think we still have adequate opportunity to continue to look at the work. I do know that it was difficult today in hearing testimony because folks don't distinguish us from anybody who previously made decisions or other kind of information, and it does become more than professional criticism. It becomes slightly personal in some of those comments, and I hope that
slightly.
I hope
I feel like my entire profession is being attacked every single day.
Right.
Well, I hope that we as a commission can stand in support of each other. Right. That we know, because we've all had patients like this in the course of our lifetime, or people that we've been with who have distorted sometimes the way or are not entertain a conversation or a dialogue, but start on the offensive. And that's just difficult because it doesn't give us a place to find the common ground or the place to start the narrative that creates a relationship. So, I think everybody did a great job today, not rising to the, or being reactive. It's a little hard, and I know that consumers are thinking that we just don't care because of our neutrality, but I think that we have to continue with that place of dignity and really saying, I'm listening, but I'm not going to give you an emotional reaction, which for me as a psychologist is not always easy. So I think it's I wanted to raise my hand. Like, are you answering? But we can't do that. And so I think we should feel confident that we acted in the appropriate way today and that we're taking the right steps forward, and then we'll work in concert with OHA and others to make sure we maintain the credibility of the body of work that we continue to do.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can I just say, because we can't respond and we can't correct things that are grossly, blatantly wrong. So most of these folks that are talking about their pain and the things that have happened to them are not things because of anything that we in the Chronic Pain Task Force or the HERC or Guideline Note 56 had anything to do with. And it's astounding. It's horrible. I'm embarrassed for my profession. But we did not do anything that caused them to be kicked out of their clinics. You know, most of these folks, they have all these other processes. If you have MS, it's a covered service. You get opioids and whatever else you need. I mean, so lots of these stories don't fit with what it is we have done or what it is we're trying to do. And so I really need you all to understand, because this is so complicated, that for those of us that work in this every single day, I have 100,000 OHP patients. That is not what we are mandating that happens to any of them. What happens in the physician's office, we can't control. But
And in our agenda preparation, and in fact in your materials, you saw PowerPoint slides that were designed to try and clarify some of the issues, because I know that it's even harder for you guys who are kind of getting the rolled up version of all this to understand exactly what it was we were doing a few hours earlier. But even us on VBBS, we're trying to understand exactly what it was that we have to do, what are the consequences of making decision X here versus what will that mean for Y over there. And so a lot of those PowerPoints that you saw in your package were really designed to clarify that. And we also said, let's do the PowerPoints that speak not just to our own membership, but also to those people in the audience, to try and get them to understand what Holly Jo was just saying about what's covered and what's not, and what's real and what's not. And some of them are probably on narcotics today because they're in a covered line for something else that deserves therapy, and most of them probably don't have chronic pain as the diagnosis that's driving any coverage that they have. So
I just want to thank you all actually for being part of our body here, which is an open public body. We're really unique, and what I was hearing from a lot of the audience members was anger over decisions and things that we didn't do, but there's no public person to go and complain to. So they're mad at the CDC, they're mad at a state government perhaps, or they're mad at their doctor, but there's no way for them to confront them. So you're hearing that anger and that upset because we are an open public body that welcomes public input. So I want to thank you for being willing to be part of this.
But patients aren't getting it because physicians aren't getting it.
Right.
Physicians aren't communicating it. And part of that has to do is we have to have some type of greater simplicity in the message that is given to healthcare providers for the messages that they give to the patients. So we can have all of this complicated task force recommendation, unless somehow we make it as a simple message to healthcare providers, patients aren't going to understand it.
Yeah, an interesting anecdote I'll share in our Providence system. We wrestling with this question about whether routine mammography for average risk women, whether our standard should be that women can have mammography every year or every other year. One set of guidelines says they should get it every year. Another, Cancer Society and a few others say every other year is okay. So when we started talking about an every other year is okay, one of the doctors who's on our task force trying to figure out what the right thing to do is goes in with his wife, who is average risk, into a clinic that is operated by Providence after these new guidelines are published. And the rule is it's okay to do it every year or every other year. But what was stated to that wife of that doctor was, we'll just do it every other year because if I do it every year, I'm going to get in trouble. And so he comes out of that room going, I was the one that made these guidelines, and there was no truth to that at all. But somehow that's what got communicated down to the front line. So that story is important because the unintended consequences, and that's within a Providence employed system model. We're talking about a whole bunch of providers who don't know a lot about what we do, and it's just about Medicaid coverage. And so I think those are the nuances that kind of get played out, and these poor people are the ones that are caught in the middle of it.
Again, the point of the communication, I mean, it's like a broken record. You have to push that.
I also appreciate Kevin's point about the brain science. We know that without the brain there is no pain, and so the idea of site-specific pain and what I have a little bit of umbrage with the substitute alternative treatments, because actually we know there's great efficacy in the brain science and the kind of work that's being done around chronic pain to teach people how to moderate their pain symptomology and become less reactive and to kind of dampen down the amygdala's reaction. But we don't talk about that, and even my medical colleagues, when I talk about that, seem to look at me a little funny at first. So I do think that there's still, if Dr. Mackey, and I think he's referring to Sean Mackey, who's at Stanford now, as well as Beth Darnell moved from OHSU to Stanford as well, and there's Michael Shopman, who's at Tufts. If we bring in some of that science, there may be because there's a lot of research being done now around this. There's a great Tufts article that just came out last month, but that wasn't what the pain task force had. I mean, this is evolving science that's being rapidly looked at. It's just difficult because we're still in the cut, poke, prod procedural kind of evaluation around chronic pain, and I don't know that we as a healthcare culture have moved very far down that road, and so it is the panic of, I'm going to cut you off because I don't want to lose my license, has been said to patients to their face.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think I liken it a little bit, too, the dynamic to, we talk about who should be doing complex surgeries for cancer, like Whipple's. And, it used to be any general surgeon could do it. And when evidence came out saying that the ones who do a lot of it and specialize have better outcomes, initially the guys who were doing a few of these said, I can do this. But then as it became clear that there's more to this than I thought, their response is, well, I should not do this anymore. And I think there's an element of that that's going on. The difference is that you can say, well, I'm going to send them all to Paul Hansen. But with these pain patients, when they realize I don't know anything about what you were just talking about, they don't know who else to send them to. Or if they do know who to send them to, there's a 3-month wait to get in. And I think that's another problem that they run into, where they're not really trying to dump the patient, but they effectively are.
Every primary care office.
Right. But how many primary care offices could say anything about what Linnea just shared with us?
15 of my 26 primary care clinics could tell you that.
Really?
Because we have integrated behavioral health clinicians. And my new phrase is behavioral health is not a destination.
Yeah, it's part of the fabric. Huh? That's good.
Pain management is primary care.
Yeah.
And it's team. It's both and.
All right, well, so I think it was good for us to commiserate a little bit about what we didn't do today, and also to feel a little bit of what we heard from that. So,
and so we'll be
can I just
sending.
ask one more thing, Dan?
Yeah.
Is there any way to get better clarity, like Kevin had asked for, from them? Because I really feel like sometimes we are led astray. I mean, I felt like it with some of the drug things we looked at. Some of those people were not only paid to be here and talk to us, but they were from out of state and had all sorts of other conflicts of interest when they were talking to us. And so is there any way that we can standardize? I mean, because I know you guys say, can you please announce, you name any conflict of interest? I guess the things that would matter to me is, are you here on your own behalf? Are you here, are you working for somebody else? And do you live in the state of Oregon?
I know that I know that the Pharmacy and Therapeutics committee has some form that they have folks fill out for testimony. That's the only body that I've heard do anything like that.
Every patient that was here today declared whether they had a conflict of interest.
So you're not very specific about it.
Well, I don't. That doesn't particularly speak to me. I mean, I don't think we have to make it more complicated than what it is, with people showing up who are expressing distress. They say they don't have a conflict of interest. I don't think that we have to go in deeper to try to find some kind of sinister motive from them.
I don't know that it pertains to this particular topic, but I think perhaps what Holly was referencing was one of the previous topics where the drug company paid for travel for people to come from out of state to testify on behalf of a drug therapy, and that wasn't disclosed.
And there was certainly times at our chronic pain task force where there was definitely people who were not fully disclosed about their backgrounds.
Well, I think it's kind of tough. It's kind of tough.
With our Humira thing, we found out after with the Humira, the last thing that we were talking about with the HS, then the two dermatologists went right out to talk to the drug reps that were there from Humira.
Well, that doesn't mean that they're connected with them, other they might be asking for other related information.
Yeah, if they're not getting paid, if they're not getting any remuneration, talking to those guys isn't really a conflict of interest any more than talking to your colleagues who are trying to restrict budgets is not a conflict of interest,
right.
unless you're being paid more.
It just feels like we're not getting all the information.
Right. Well, listen, I think that we'll have to decide how much of that testimony should impact what we do with the evidence and the stuff that's being presented to us. But that's always, a question one could ask is: Are these representative of everybody out there, or are these the 15 people who really would have a problem and the rest of the world wouldn't? We always have to answer that question for ourselves. And so, I don't know. I will tell you that people I know in the Providence system say that these stories that they're hearing about abandonment are true, and that the access to the complex pain clinics that we're operating is restricted because it loses money and it has to be that way. And so I didn't hear anything there today that I haven't heard from providers within Providence who are nervous about what we're thinking about doing themselves. So,
and I would also say, the one thing I think that we've seen in our area that hasn't come up is not so much strictly just the opioid taper, but we've also seen a lot of really aggressive use of pain contracts with a lot of the clinics in our area, and then they have patients that are signing pain contracts related to opioid use, and they're making agreements that they will continue to prescribe as long as they follow these criteria, and then they wait for the patient to do something that slightly deviates, and then they fire them. And then they have 30 days to transition. So I think it's a little bit, I think the anger is coming from a lot of places that is both just related to the other guideline notes, but then also some of the other strategies that are being used to not have to manage that patient population.
Yeah, it's no fun to be. And cancer's been carved out of a lot of this, but we're even working on that same question because we've had conflicts. Because substance use disorder does exist in patients with nasty cancer.
Really?
Yeah, and I believe that. And when you don't have an agreement about how you're going to manage those narcotics, then that doesn't. But we're not doing the agreements because somebody's telling us to. It's because it actually can help us. But how do we do that without making the patients feel like criminals from the get-go? Is really a challenge for us. And in Washington, there's some rules about prescribing that our colleagues up there say have really been a mess about how they can do, and the cancer was not carved out of that. And so I can't remember the nuances of that, but the state implemented some rules up there that we're trying to stay ahead of that, trying to say that if somebody in Oregon decides to do some prescribing rules, that we're ready to deal with that when we need to get cancer patients treated well. And it's just, I tell the story just because it's so hard to just show up and try and do a good job these days with all these complexities.
So I think I've certainly seen people fire people for their cannabis use. And that has been a red herring kind of thing of, okay, you can't, this is my contract. It's rigid. And so there are people who, providers who just don't know how to deal with the patient population, so they act in a punitive way to the patient. So we have still a long way to go in our chronic pain training, those of us who had to do that over the course of time. What we knew when we did that was our one-time 6 hours of chronic pain 8 years ago, or whenever that was
Longer
instituted,
than that, 11
doesn't reflect the current level of information. And so there may be some other kinds of pieces that are outside of our jurisdiction and our responsibility that inform this, but we need to be aware of them and speak to. We can't change the culture of a provider culture that doesn't like chronic pain patients. And the issues of benzos as well as opioids has been a very difficult one for folks. But we know there are other things besides medicaid pharmacology to treat conditions. But we as a culture in healthcare haven't gotten quite that far with that as well. So.
Was there? I want to make sure. Did I hear somebody on the phone trying to chime in?
I don't know if, I just wanted to reflect. I don't know if you all saw there was a JAMA article out last week which looked at death rates for opioids by all over the country, and only Oregon and Wyoming have seen a reduction. So something in our state's going right. We have no idea what, but just.
Yeah, I guess that one commenter might need to have that study given to her.
It just came out. It was in JAMA like last week.
Yeah.
So.
I wanted to say that.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is coming up again when people are like, well, we don't have the clinics to see these complex patients. And I know people look at me, and I can't see your faces, so I don't know what you're doing. They look at me like I'm crazy, but the reason that we were recommending pain education for not only patients but was for clinicians is because pain is ubiquitous in the healthcare system. And you need it from the top to the bottom, and we do a crappy job with it. And until we actually start thinking that maybe we don't understand this stuff, there will never be enough clinics. You will never be able to shut somebody off into somewhere else where they're no longer a problem for whoever the prescriber is or whoever the clinician is. And we have to always remember that all persistent pain started from acute pain. So it would make sense to kind of understand that process at the get-go and kind of have people have a little bit better tool set from a system-wide approach, rather than just to think that we're going to just have a bunch of pain clinics going to open up and somehow take the problem off of individual clinician pain.
Thank you. Darren, you have some?
Oh, I just wanted to
wrap-up comment?
Yeah, well, yeah. Along the lines of trying to, get to some closure on this topic, assuming, the OHA review, proceeds and we're able to take this topic up in April. Again, the April 25th date is looking very promising, and Daphne has been able to secure a hold on our preferred spot of Wilsonville Clackamas Community College, if that date does turn out to be the right one. And so we'll get an email out looking to confirm that as soon as possible, but it's looking promising.
All right. Well, if there's no other comments, I guess I'll declare us adjourned.
I'll move if she has her.
So I'll call this meeting of the Health Evidence Review Commission to order and start off with roll call. Mark Gibson. Here. Adrian Irwin.
Here.
Gary Allen.
Here.
Linnea Lindsay.
Here.
Holly Joe Hodges.
Here.
Leda Garside.
Here.
Mike Adler is coming, I'm told, right? And Devin Consagra is, I think, absent. And Leslie Sutton is also absent.
Okay.
Oh, she is. There we go. Great. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you.
Let us know if you can't hear. We had some trouble this morning, but we think we've got it figured out.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Okay. First order of business is to approve the minutes. So has the membership had a chance to review the minutes, and are there any concerns about their content? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Kevin.
Oh, go ahead.
Kevin, this is Angela Sanders. I'm also on the phone.
Oh, Angela, I'm sorry. I missed you. Okay.
That's okay.
This is Kevin Cucaro. I'm also on the phone.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Anyone else on the phone?
That's what I get. That's what I get for not having a roster right in front of me. So I'm sorry, you guys. So on the approval of the minutes, is there any alterations? If not, is there a motion to approve? Thank you. Second?
Second.
So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay.
Aye. Aye.
And I'll discipline myself to wait for all you guys on the phone to respond. Sorry about that. Okay, director's report. Darren?
Just real quick, Kevin already mentioned it, but I did want to reaffirm our apologies for issues we were having at the beginning of the VBBS meeting with the phones. We're in a new space, new equipment here that we weren't used to, but it does appear that we've got those figured out. We've had confirmation that just a little bit into VBBS, we got that straightened out. So again, apologize for that. My only announcement was, and he's not here for any congratulations, but Devin Consagra was reappointed for an additional second term. So he's with us through, I think it's February of 2022. So that's all I had to report.
Okay. Well, our next agenda item is about the VBBS subcommittee report, which was to include a decision on our work around the chronic pain task force recommendations. But we had some late-breaking events that caused us to not address that this morning. And our Chief Medical Officer for the Oregon Health Authority, Dr. Harganani, is here to explain the situation, and we can talk a little bit about what happened that made us table that issue today.
Great. This is working. Can we tell? Thank you, Charles. For some of you, this is a repeat from this morning, and for others who are listening, it might have been hard to hear this morning. The change in our plans really is based on the fact that transparency and integrity are really our core values here at OHA. I and OHA leadership have recently learned that our contracted medical consultant to the HERC, Kat Livingston, has a potential conflict of interest as she's a paid consultant and co-investigator for 2 studies. These are ongoing studies, research outcomes not available.
Could you speak up a little bit? I can't hear you very well.
Sure.
Thank you.
I will try. Please stop me if I'm not being loud enough.
Thank you.
The 2 studies that Dr. Livingston is involved in are evaluating the outcomes of the work that HERC did previously around coverage for back pain. These include 2 studies, specifically the PCORI study, Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute-funded study, and a study funded by NIDA, or the National Institute for Drug Abuse. Based on these new revelations about the potential conflict of interest, OHA has requested that this morning VBBS and here today HERC table the deliberations and decision on this policy and propose changes related to chronic pain coverage for OHP. We will take this time as it is tabled to seek independent review of the policy recommendations that have come before you to ensure that there is no impact from a potential conflict of interest. Kat Livingston will be presenting a written statement about the disclosure of her relationship to the studies, both to OHA and to the HERC. In addition, I will be completing a top-to-bottom review of our complete conflict of interest processes as it relates to staff, consultants, and members of the HERC to ensure that this doesn't happen in the future in terms of this late understanding. So we apologize for this delay. We know there's been a tremendous amount of work put into this. Appreciate the ongoing input broadly and publicly. We do hope and intend for the HERC and the VBBS subcommittee to reconvene before the next May scheduled meeting, because we know that we need to move this discussion and deliberation and decision-making soon to be considered for the biennial review. But we don't know when that will be yet, and we will be sure to post that publicly and to ensure we work with you all to find a time that we can get you back together. So that's OHA's request, and we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. So hearing that this morning, the VBBS, and we recognize that we had the authority to go ahead and deliberate and even take action against the OHA recommendation, but we chose to take the advice because we didn't want to make a decision that would be tainted after further review. We want to make sure that whatever ends up happening, everybody agrees that everything that did happen is above board and it is understood beforehand. So we tabled our discussion in the morning. We actually went ahead and took testimony from public members who had come not knowing that this was going to happen, and I think we're prepared to do the same here at the HERC. The question that and the frustration that some of the testimony, folks that came to give testimony came forth, that frustration was with us as well. We were hoping that we were all prepared to kind of come to a finish line today, but not at the expense of having the public not trust our outcome. So that question then about what do we do now, our options if we don't address the issue today are that we address it at our next meeting in May, which is scheduled for May 16th. The problem with that is that if the changes that come out of our discussion on May 16th are going to become transmitted to the legislature in a timely fashion, it takes longer, and usually it takes about 2 months to get all of that ready, and we would have instead about 3 weeks. And that's a timeline that's making the staff feel very nervous that what needs to happen couldn't happen quickly enough. And that raises the question then of what if we had an extra meeting where we could address this topic. And we've been toying in the morning session around moving the meeting to April 25th, which is a date that many of the VBBS people could participate. We would actually propose that we take our entire agenda from May 16th and move it to April 25th, and that if the HERC could meet on that day as well, we could get to a finish line on this question and then have whatever outcome be part of the biennial report. And so that's a date that's tentatively thrown out for HERC membership. I think Darren will be polling the other HERC members who are not on the VBBS to see if there's any availability on that date. And the trade-off would be that we would get out of meeting on May 16th. There is one agenda item that may not be able to. The VBBS would certainly be able to do all of its work on April 25th. The HERC may have one agenda item that has to hang off till May 16th. It would not be the chronic pain. In our opinion, it would be something else. And that something else may require us to have a single agenda item meeting in May 16th. And if we did that, then I would say that we could do it as a virtual meeting rather than a face-to-face. So the working hopeful plan right now is that we can shift everything to April 25th if we can get quorums of both bodies on that date. And so I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, so I wouldn't clear off May 16th from your calendar by any stretch of the imagination at this point, but we can certainly take a poll of folks and try to get this nailed down as quickly as possible.
So I put that out there only because a lot of the folks that came to testify were confused and frustrated and trying to figure out, now when do I need to come back? And so we won't even have that answer today, but whenever it is known, it will be posted on the website, and there isn't a function on the website where if you want to be updated, you can give their email and it'll automatically update you of the public meetings that are a part of this commission. And so for those who are interested in making sure they know as soon as anybody else does, that's the best way for that to happen. But I don't think we're going to have that date defined by the end of this date, but we're targeting the 25th if we can find quorums that work. Are there questions from our membership around this issue? And to be clear, we have the authority to move forward even though the health authority leadership is asking us not to, but I think their advice here is wise, and so I'm, as chair, I'll take the prerogative to say we are going to table it. I do want to make sure that we accommodate those people that made time to come and testify today. The bad news is we're not going to make a decision. The good news is that the agenda time that we had left to dig through the proposals is time that we could use to accept public testimony. And so, and I'm not sure what level of public testimony is out there today, but Darren, do we have a lot of folks? Or
I've got 9.
9 folks. Okay. So the recommendations from the Chronic Pain Task Force have been published and have been shared with the public, and it's very valid for them to make their public testimony today. And so I think we'll go ahead and entertain that. Darren, you'll help explain the process and